Welcome to PowerPivot video number 9. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, in this video, we're going to talk about calculated fields. Now, we've already done a few calculated fields in earlier videos, but we're going to do a bunch of calculated fields, not only in this video, but over the next 4 videos. Now, I want to go look at the end result. Here's what we want. We want to have net revenue, cost of goods sold, gross profit, and gross profit percentage. We will see how to create those calculated fields. And then also we want to do distinct count on number of sales days, average revenue per day, and percentage change. When we get to this percentage change formula, that'll be the last formula we do in this video. That'll introduce the calculate function, and that'll be our transition to the following video where we jump more into the ultimate function in PowerPivot Calculate. All right, so let's go back to our workbook to get to our Manage Data Model. PowerPivot window, Manage, or Alt-B-M to open Manage Data Model. Now we're over here on the fSales table. This bottom part is the measured grid. This is where we can create our calculated fields. We can add calculated columns up here. Now we already have one calculated field created down in the measured grid. Now the advantage of doing our calculated fields is this is an explicit measure. We can add our number formatting here, and then anytime we want to use it in a pivot table, we drag and drop, which we did with this one already. The number formatting followed us around. It's easy to edit here. We can use it not only in pivot tables, but other calculated fields or calculated columns. All right, so we'll build a bunch of calculated fields down here, but we want to first build a calculated column. Now back in video number 5, we did a calculated column and a calculated field for net revenue or total net revenue. We took the product ID, looked it up using the related function, got the price from over here on the products table, then multiplied 1 minus the discount, and finally times the units. Now in video 5, we did calculated column and calculated field. Now I'm going to choose to do the same formula here as a calculated field because we're actually going to need the net revenue in each row of our table for a later calculation when we do approximate lookup. That'll be like video 12 or 13 when we do frequency tables. All right, so I'm going to first come up here to add column, double click, and this is going to be net revenue. By doing this calculated column, again, it'll remind us what we did in earlier videos. It will also remind us when we do our cost of goods sold formula how this is done. Now I'm going to type an equal sign and immediately jump up to the formula bar. And we're first going to look up using related the price. I'm going to click over on products, click on retail price. Now this is for the revenue. Later we'll do standard cost for the cost. Now I'm going to close parentheses and just enter this. Now how does this work? This is row context. This is a calculated column. It knew to look up for each row. If you scroll down, you can see different product IDs. Because of the row context, it knew to go look up that price and deliver it here. Now, as we talked about in video 5, there's no cell references here. The formula is the same all the way down, but because of row context, it sees whatever's in this row from the relationship. Product ID is related to the products table, so easily gets the price. Now, we're going to need to multiply this times, in parentheses, 1 minus, and we want to get our revenue discount. We're following the convention of we're always going to use our table name and then our field name in square brackets, tab, close parentheses. Now we'll see explicitly in this video when we start using calculated fields and other calculated fields why this convention is important. Here we know this is the direct reference to a column in one of our tables. All right. Times, and then fSales, down arrow all the way to units, tab. Now that'll work all the way down, but I want to round it. There are some decimals under there that we need to round, so I'm going to come up and use the round function. Don't get tricked by that currency format there. That's just displaying 2 decimals. I want to actually hack them off, so 2. Now these are DAX functions. Round, although it's over in Excel also, that's a DAX function over here in PowerPivot. That's the related. That replaces our VLOOKUP, both DAX functions and enter. Now again, we did that up here because later we're going to explicitly use this in another calculated column. Now, I don't want to rely on the implicit sum function over in the pivot table. I want to create an explicit function. So this is going to be total net revenue. Now, I actually oscillate back and forth between using spaces and not using spaces. But we want to make a point here. These are calculated fields. This is going to show up in the pivot table field list. So if you want to make it easier on people, oftentimes you want to use spaces. I tend to just not use spaces, but here I'm going to try and make it easy. Colon equal. That's the assignment operator. Everything after this will be our formula. Simply do sum. And this is fSales. And I'm going to arrow down to our new column net revenue. Close parentheses and enter. We immediately want to format this. Now, earlier in the video, I always came up here and went like this. I love that. That's what I'm going to do it most of the time. But I got to show you a couple other ways also. Right-click Format. And then there it is. We can say currency and click OK. Now, we created this calculated field in the measured grid down here. If we want to go and see another location, we can either edit it or create. We're going to go back over to our Excel window. And in the PowerPivot ribbon tab, calculated fields, we either create new calculated field or manage. Manage opens up. We can see we have 2. If I click edit, I can see there's all the same information. I'm going to click OK. Close, Alt Tab. All right, so we have total net revenue. Now, again, we did this up here, and we simply summed it. That number formatting will follow us around, and we will definitely use this calculated field or measure in other calculated fields. Now, before we do our total cost of goods sold calculation down here, let's look at this formula. This is similar. Notice round related. But here we looked up retail price. When we do our cost of goods sold, we'll be looking up standard cost. Here we did, boom, this revenue discount. We had to do 1 minus. But we have an actual net cost equivalent. So we'll just take this times our units. So the formula will be similar to this. Now, in video number 5, we talked about the difference. When do you choose calculated column or calculated field? Now, here we could totally do the calculated column for cost of goods sold and then add it up down here, just like we did net revenue and use the sum function down here. In general, it comes down to calculated columns. All the values are stored in RAM. If you have only a few values, then the impact on the in-memory columnar database is going to be small. If you have lots and lots of different values here, then of course the columnar database and the RAM will take up more space. This is also calculated when you refresh or when you create it. The calculated field, we're actually going to simulate the whole column inside our formula. That means the values aren't sitting anywhere in RAM. They're actually calculated and created when you drop it into the pivot table or you pivot it. So actually, a good rule of thumb is if you're using your calculated field and you drop it and it takes a long time to calculate, maybe it'd be better to store it in RAM up here and not calculate it at the time of query. Now, I actually, for the related, I could put the related up here to look up standard cost. Guess what? There's not very many of them. That wouldn't impact RAM very much. But this is a small data set. I'm just going to come down here and build the whole formula in one shot. So you ready? I have my cell selected. As soon as I start typing total cost of goods sold, I'm jumped up to the formula bar, colon, equal sign. And then how do we get row context to happen up in a calculated field? We use the X functions, SUMX, COUNTX, etc. I'm going to use SUMX. It actually will iterate through the entire table and calculate all of the rows. So the table is fSales tab, comma, the expression round and related. But now we're going to look up, and I'm going to type this out. This is dProducts tab. Close parentheses. That will get the actual lookup price for each row times, and we have fSales. And now we're going to use our percent of standard cost. You can see that right there. That's the net cost equivalent times fSales. All the way to the bottom, we got units tab. Comma 2 to round to the penny, close parentheses. That gives us the entire expression. I wish inside of PowerPivot it worked like Excel when you could click on the screen tip and it would highlight the whole thing, but there you go. Boop. Close parentheses and enter. I'm going to immediately come up here, English. Now, one thing we didn't look at just a moment ago when we looked at our dialog box for our calculated fields, up there you can write a description. You can actually come right here and a right click. You could do the formatting. You could also use description and type something like whatever you want. Click OK. Now, if we were to go back over Alt-Tab, PowerPivot, calculated fields, manage calculated fields, total cost of goods sold, units. Boom, there it is. Everything's filled out. We did it over in our measured grid. Click OK. Click Close. Alt-Tab. All right, so there we have it. Now we can calculate gross profit, colon equal sign. And here's our first calculated field where we're going to use other calculated fields. And here's our convention. You type a square bracket. And check that out. The M's mean measure or calculated field. So we're going to take total net revenue, tab, minus square bracket, arrow down, total cost of goods sold. So our formula up here, there's no ambiguity. We know that the square brackets means that is a calculated field or measure. All right, so enter. Come right up here. Let's add some formatting. Now I can already see I was inconsistent. I mentioned earlier my inclination is always to not have spaces. I'm going to click here and come up to the formula bar and edit this, space and enter. Now look at this. We have an error. Why doesn't it update? You know, if you use sheet references or define names or cell references in Excel, it updates, but PowerPivot doesn't. I changed the field name and it didn't update. I'm going to come up to the formula bar, square brackets, down arrow to total cost of goods sold, tab, and enter. There we have our emerging list of calculated fields. Now we're going to calculate gross profit percentage. This is going to involve division. I'm going to take gross profit and divide it over total net revenue. So down here, I start typing. I jump up to the formula bar, colon equal sign. Now I could simply divide them, but there's something really cool in PowerPivot. You can use the divide function. Divide, and the cool thing is it has a third argument that allows you to put in what you want to show up if there's an error. So the numerator is going to be square bracket, measure gross profit tab, comma, square bracket, measure all the way at the down, measure total net revenue tab. Now if you leave this omitted, it'll just show blank instead of the error. That's what I'm going to do. Close parentheses and enter. Now I want to come up here, percentage format, and boom. By default, notice the button over in Excel, when we click it, it has no decimals. They fixed that over here. Now there's 2 decimals. Now we have our list of calculated fields for our first report. And remember, these are the totals, right? So if we look at that 48.41%, that's for every single transaction. Because these are calculated fields, they'll understand filter context, which just means when we drop criteria into the pivot table, that thing will change and calculate according to our new criteria. All right, let's create our first pivot table. Click on the pivot table. It comes over to the Excel workbook. I'm going to click OK. New worksheet. Come down here, double click, PT5, enter. All right, so here's our field list. Let's first go to our calendar table, and we want months down the rows. Boom. Years down the columns. Look at that. That's amazing. Now let's go down and get our formulas. Formulas in a pivot table. This is just amazing. There it is, total net revenue. As soon as I drop it down into values, instantly that number right there, remember that formula was showing the total over in the measured grid, but right here, look what it did. It instantly, since 2015 April, and calculated 2 criteria for total revenue. Down here, boom, 2 criteria, 2016 and September. A formula is doing that. That is amazing. Now, we're going to add some more criteria with slices, but now let's just total cost of goods sold. Boom. Actually, at this point, you can click, click, and they jump down there because that's the default. We want to show these values down the rows. And look at that. That is starting to look just like the report we want. Now, look at this. Boom, there's 4 formulas. Each one are calculating with 2 criteria. 15 January. All right, now let's go out a couple slicers. I'm going to go up to Analyze, Insert Slicer, and I'm going to check on the All Products. I want color and product name. Click OK. All right, so let's move, resize, add a color, move, resize, and add a color. You know, I don't like any of those. I'm just going to select this green. So watch this. This is just amazing. Bellin. And instantly, we see there's our calculated results. If I went Carlota and I want to see just blue, for example, there we have all of our gross profit percentages. If I want, or even fluorescent pink. Whoops, I can see. I need to make this a little bit. And there are our calculations. All right, now think about this 52.23%. That's a formula, gross profit divided by total net revenue. Guess what? There's 4 conditions. 2014 January, fluorescent pink, Carlota. And that formula, if we go back over to Alt-BM, that formula right there, look at this. It's just gross profit divided by total net revenue. But no way, filter context allows this formula to understand those conditions in the pivot table. If I come over and look at diagram view, and pull this down here, what's happening underneath in the columnar database is we pulled month and year. This table gets filtered just by the month and the year, so like January 2015, which in turn, through the relationship, filters this table. Also from our dimension table over here, we had color and product name. This table gets filtered and then filters this table. That is amazing. Now let's go back and create a couple more formulas for our second report. First thing we want to do is get a distinct count of the dates from our fact table. For a few of the years we had sales, we did not have sales on every day. The final year, 2017, you'll see that we have sales on every day. So I'm going to come down, click in a cell. When I start typing, I jump up to the formula bar. Number of sales days, colon, equal sign, and no way we get to use the awesome distinct count. If only we had distinct count over in Excel. As I showed in an earlier video, there's array formulas for distinct count. But over here, we don't mess around. We just look for an obviously named function, distinct count, fSales. And here we're going to use the date because we actually want to count not from the calendar table, but from this table right here. Now remember, this will give me a distinct count of everything. Enter. When we drop it into our pivot table, the criteria then will give us a distinct count by whatever conditions or criteria we enter. I'm going to come up here and add some number formatting. Decrease the decimals. Now, you know, I want to come down here and check. I forget how many total days there are in our 4-year period. I'm not going to use this formula, but I want to see, is 11,140 all the days in 4-year periods or not? I'm going to click down here and type total number of days over 4-year period, colon, equal sign. We're going to use the function count rows. And we can go count the DC, the whole table. Notice the argument says table. It'll count the number of rows in this table. And for us, that'll tell us exactly if we have a complete calendar table, which we do, it'll tell us how many days. I don't know if there's a leap year there. I would just do 4 times 365. Come up here and expand the column. 1461. So certainly we had many days where we did not have sales. Now I'm going to click below here, and the next calculation is average sales per sale day, colon, equal sign. And here we want to take division, so I'm going to use the divide. I'm going to divide by square bracket, T, and then total net revenue, tab. That'll be the numerator, comma, and we're going to divide by square bracket. Notice we're using our convention. Measures or calculated fields are going to be in square brackets, tab, and we love this third argument. If there's an error, it'll show up as a blank instead of an error message. You could put anything you want there. Enter. I see that I have some extraneous decimals, and I like to get it to the penny, so I'm going to come up and round. Enter, and let's add some number formatting. Now, we still have one more formula, but I want to come up and create our pivot table. I'm going to create it on a new sheet. We jump over to Excel. I'm going to double-click PT6, Enter, get our field list. And for this report, our criteria in the row is going to be years. Boop. And now we can scroll down. Notice fSales is a table, right? And in the measure grid, whatever formulas we create in that measure grid show up in the bottom here. So now I want number of sales days. I'm going to go back and change that D there. And then average sales per day, boom, look at that. So we can clearly see, looks like for the first 3 years, we were not open all the time. But in year 17, we finally said, let's do it. We're open all the time. Average, and although the average is less, the total overall revenue, actually, we could drag that and take a look. Total net revenue, on the fly calculations. That's what's so amazing about Excel and PowerPivot. OK, so look, of course, we have total more revenues, but it looks like our average revenue went down. Maybe selling on Saturdays and Sundays, we don't sell as much. Now, I do want to create one last column here, and we'll introduce the calculate function. I want to look at the percentage change from year to year. Oh, look, I accidentally typed caret instead of 6. So I'm going to double click, edit. Looks like I have cap locks on. PT6, enter. Now our next calculation in DAX is going to be looking at net revenue, and we're going to compare 2 periods and figure out the percentage change. Now I actually want to create this formula in Excel. Let's see, that's E5 divided by E4 minus 1. I want to create it over here in Excel and talk about a few things that we're going to run into over in DAX. Now first off, those are relative cell references, right? So we can just jump to the period before, no problem. But we're going to have a formula that sits in a single cell, and somehow from the filter context, that means the criteria 2015, we're going to need the current period's revenue and the same period from 1 year ago's revenue, divide it, and then subtract 1. Now, if we were thinking about how we do this in an Excel formula, you could use SUMIFs with a criteria 2015 minus 1, right? But get this, over in DAX, there's an actual function called same period last year. So instead of doing 2 cell references like this, we'll have the total revenue calculation divided by same period last year. And we'll see how to use that function inside of the calculate function. Now, there's one other problem here, too. Check that out. When we copy it up, we'll get a value with the formula. Same thing's going to happen in our pivot table because there's no sales from the previous period here. But check this out. In Excel, we can simply do if error. Now, think about this. That calculation is spitting out a number. That's one data type, right? Number, comma. We could put double quote, double quote. That's a 0-length text string, right? It's text, though. In Excel, if error, you're allowed to have a number data type and a text data type in the same formula, not over in DAX. So we'll have to learn how to use not a double quote, but the blank function. Let's go over to PowerPivot, Alt-B-M. All right, I've selected this cell. I'm going to start typing the calculated field name. Total net revenue from last year, colon, equal, and here it is, the calculate function. Now, the calculate function allows us to change the filter context. And what I mean by that is, if you have an expression, we're going to do square bracket total net revenue. Remember, when you draw total net revenue as a calculated field itself, by itself with no calculate into the pivot table. When it sees 2015, boom, it gets the revenues just for 2015. But now, because we have that calculated field inside calculate, now we have filter, filter. I can put some condition or criteria there, and these are and criteria. We're just going to use one here. I can drop a condition or criteria here, and it will change the filter context. It no longer will be 2015. It'll be something else. Now, next video, we'll talk about calculate, and we'll look at the different circumstances because there's some tricky things to how the filter works. But here, we're going to comma and have just one single condition. Same period last year. You are kidding me. Look at that. Same period last year. And it wants date, so I'm going to do DC, the date column. Now remember, the date column is connected through a relationship to the fSales table. So of course, it'll see a year in the pivot table like 2016 and know to go back to 2015. Close parentheses. That's the only filter we have. Close parentheses on the calculate and enter. I'm immediately going to come up here and add some formatting. Now, it's only showing you not the total like up here because this got all 4 years. This one can only get 3 years. It can't get at that first one because when it's in the cell in the pivot table for the first year, there is no previous, so it doesn't include that. And we'll look at that. We'll actually drop this in our pivot table and check it out. Now we're going to do our formula for percentage change. Click in the cell, start typing, percentage change for net revenue, colon, equal sign, square bracket, T, down arrow, total net revenue, divided by square bracket. Notice we're using that convention. Square brackets alone mean this is a calculated field or measured. T, arrow, arrow, total net revenue from last year. And then subtract 1. Enter. Immediately want to come up and add some percentage number format. And I love this. Just as we mentioned before, 2 decimals. Now let's go drop this into the pivot table. We're going to have an error, and then we're going to have to come back and fix it. So let's go back to Excel. I do want to keep this over here, so I'm going to put this over here. I think that's one off, right? So that one, OK. And now click inside the pivot table. We have our pivot table field list we can drag down. And there's our, I really should, as we saw a couple videos ago, there's a bunch of fields we're never going to use. We can hide those from the client tool. We didn't do that here, but all right, let's do total revenue from last year. So after that, and you can see there's our total, right? That's the total we got over in our measured grid. There's the total just for 1, 2, 3. Now let's drag our percentage change. There's our error. But there it is. I think that's what we got with our formulas. We better get that. There it is. Let's go back over to PowerPivot, Alt-Tab. Now, there's a few ways we could fix this formula. Now, one way is we could use if error. We saw that over in Excel. And come to the end, comma, the value if error argument, instead of double quote, we could use the blank function. Now, I read in Casper de Jong's, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's one of those super smart PowerPivot guys. I read in one of his posts that he said if error is a notoriously slow calculating function. But if we had a small data set, we could do that. Let's go look at our updated formula. It's working just fine. A better way to do this is to use the if function. And we can test our measure for last year. Are you equal to 0? Comma. If that's true, then we use the blank function. Otherwise, and there we come to the end and put a parentheses. We run our formula. Enter, go over and look in Excel. That one works fine too. Wow. That was a lot in this video. We created a bunch of calculated fields, created this report where we had yearly calculations. We also created the PT5 where we had total revenue, cost of goods sold, profit, and gross profit percentage, and ran 4 different criteria on each cell. Back to the data model, we did the heavy lifting here with a bunch of formulas, built them all here, added our number formatting. was able to use some of our calculated fields over in the pivot table and saw filter context. We even used a bunch of calculated fields in other calculated fields. Now, in our next video, we'll talk about the calculate function and the filter function. All right, we'll see you next video.